Welcome Vishal to Coffee for Cause 0 Hours. Let me just quickly introduce you to our audience. So we have Vishal Bhardwaj, who is Group Head CSR Dalmia Bharat Group and CEO of Dalmia Bharat Foundation. Vishal has had an interesting professional journey with a master's degree in social work. Vishal started his career with the government and was closely involved with grassroots projects of Ministry of Rural Development. Later on, he moved on to a non-government organization, a national level non-government organization, where again he was involved in a lot of social initiatives at the grassroots, and then took a career shift and moved on to a corporate side. And now he leads a CSR arm of the Dalmia Bharat Group and also leads the foundation. He is the CEO of the Dalmia Bharat Foundation. So Vishal, before we move on to the conversation, first, if you want to add on to this one, anything that I missed out on your profile, and then introduce us to the foundation as well.
No, sir. Thank you so much, Ranjan, for the introduction. In fact, you haven't missed out on anything. But I think it has been an interesting journey this way. If you look at my career progression, I was lucky to have worked in the government sector, to have worked in the non-government sector, and then in the private sector. So that way, it has been a very interesting journey.
And can you introduce us to let's say from a layman's perspective, because we know about the Dalmia Bharat Group as such, what all initiatives, even before we move on to the social initiatives of it, like what are the products, what are the services that Dalmia Bharat Group is into? Just give us an overview, and then we move on to the social initiatives.
Sure, Ranjan. In fact, Dalmia Bharat, as you know, is one of the older business conglomerates in India, about 85 years old now. So our journey that was started pre-independence. But then in the recent times, our particular Dalmia Bharat Group is largely focused on cement manufacturing. So by volumes, we are the fourth largest cement manufacturer now in India. We are also into sugar business. So we have been one of the larger players in the sugar industry, and recently we have entered into the retail market also in sugar business. But then we also have refractories business, we have the power business. So these are some of the major businesses that the group has.
Interesting. So this big conglomerate, when did you decide to actually get into the social initiatives, or say give back to the society as well?
So as soon as the business was founded. And that was about 85 years ago. And that was the time, when the leading industries were actually, they had started to philanthropically pick up issues and start assisting or facilitating the communities in their growth and development. So we were one of the earlier starters. But then as we moved through our business also, the focus was largely on research and development, which could help the mankind. Just to take two examples, Dalmia Cement was the first cement to have produced the oil well cement. And that was the time when the nation was developing, and we needed technology for building the infrastructure. So we were the first Indian company to have produced that. The railway sleepers. So Indian Railway migrated from the wood railway sleepers to the cement railway sleepers, which had a huge environmental benefit. So that was also done by Dalmia in our early days. So there has been a focus always on research and development and bringing out products which were more sustainable. And if you see our some of our track record and our commitments in the recent past also that we have made, some of those are really futuristic. We were the first cement company to have announced carbon neutral cement by 2040. We were the first cement company to have signed RE100, then EV100. So we have made a lot of commitments that way. And we are actually tracking our contribution to the sustainable development goals also through whatever we do. So coming back to the social part of it, Ranjan, our journey actually began 85 years ago. But towards the beginning of this century, we thought that we need to institutionalize our CSR. That was the time when there was no CSR law, of course. But there were not many companies also who had institutionalized the CSR.
Right.
So we thought we would do that, and therefore we created a vertical at that point in time. Initially, we called it community development, but then gradually, I think around 2006-7, we renamed this as the CSR vertical. 2009, while we had created our strategy and we wanted to move ahead in an accelerated fashion,
guidelines came around that time. Yes.
We also then founded the Dalmia Bharat Foundation. That was in 2009. But I think the CSR law actually came into being in 2014. Yeah. But I think around 2012 there was already a talk.
2009 there were these voluntary guidelines, so many companies already started doing it. It started the terminology. So it used to be community relations at Microsoft as well. So many companies used to call it community outreach. Somebody would call it community development. So they all changed the terminology and it became CSR, and then formally got conceptualized around 2014. So that's right.
Correct. Yeah, you're right. But by the time it got converted into a law, I think we had everything in place that we needed to drive CSR at the organization. Also, Ranjan, because we are essentially a manufacturing and mining industry, our interface with the community is much larger than some of the other IT companies or service sector companies. So that way, we were actually doing a lot along with these communities already. But it was like, we, as the time passed, we kind of changed our strategy sometimes. I'll speak about that later. In fact, I'll talk more of that later. But so there were certain changes in our strategy, certain course corrections, consolidation of our work. So as would naturally happen in any organization. So that happened with us also. But now, yes, now it is a sort of fully integrated into the business. We have a very robust Dalmia Bharat Foundation working alongside us as our implementing partner, and it has also grown in the last 11 years to be a very vibrant foundation and our partner.
So you have taking decisions at a corporate level to what to do, and then because you are also CEO of the foundation, you have also been implementing those initiatives, the plans of the corporation.
So yes, Ranjan. So sorry. I'll just finish that. So in fact, that was one of the strategic shifts that we took in 2014-15. Till that time, we were largely implementing our project through our two other NGO partners, and they were like doing pretty well. But then we thought that as our business was expanding, we needed to have a larger direct interface with the communities, and therefore we thought that we should build the capacity of our foundation to really work alongside us. So that was one major strategic shift that we made, which I had talked about.
So give me an overview or probably one project or a program, a larger program that is being implemented by the foundation, which is close to your heart and you think that makes the most of the impact, probably the most promising program of the foundation. From a layman's perspective, if I'm looking at a foundation, we say, oh, this is a foundation which does some work at the grassroots. What is the impact that they are making? Probably we can start on from there. You can just pick up one best initiative and talk about that.
Yeah, I think Ranjan, before I pick up one initiative, I think I must quickly mention the kind of work that we do. Yes. Not many different projects, so I won't take much of the time there. So our focus is on two things, right? One is livelihoods, and under livelihood, we do both farm sector and off-farm sector livelihoods. The second vertical is climate action, wherein our focus is on water. So that's our major focus, besides access to clean energy. Right? So these are the two major verticals that we work on. Then, of course, there is a third vertical, what we call the social development vertical, but which is largely focused on infrastructure building and picking up projects wherein we see there are gaps locally in different regions, and we try and work with the communities to fill those gaps. So that's kind of something which is very local, based on the local needs and what we do. But our work on livelihood and climate action, that's sort of pan-India project that we do across our locations, and we have 22 active locations as we speak now.
Wow.
spread all over India. So we have a good presence spread, in south, east, northeast, north, that way, and now in the western part of India also. Uh, so when you look at our projects on water and livelihood, eventually what we are aiming at is creating sustainable livelihood through both these projects. Of course, water is more about climate action and ensuring the the climate proofing for agriculture. But eventually, that also kind of takes us to sustainable livelihood, ensured livelihood of farmers. Overall, now what we've started doing is to look at both of our flagship programs as the program which creates sustainable livelihoods. Now coming to the impact part of it. So we have actually, Ranjan, done some independent impact assessments also of our work, including the social returns on investments and studies like that. From the SROI point of view, if you ask me, our livelihood projects have actually fetched us the maximum benefit. For every rupee that we invest, there is a return of about 8 rupees, what we have found.
Wonderful.
For our water project, for every rupee that we invest, we get a return of about 4 rupees. So that's what we found. So from the pure returns point of view, I think our livelihood program is more impactful. But having said that, I think the kind of impact that we have been able to make through water projects. Recently we've got an impact assessment study done through EY of our water projects, and the quality of life that we have been able to improve through these initiatives, I think the impact is really encouraging. And
so what is the water project as such? What are the interventions that we have planned around it?
So basically, Ranjan, what we are trying to do is to harvest as much of rainwater as we can and store that over the ground or under the ground, so that there is more water available for the farmers for their agriculture, right? So largely what we do for this is sometimes we take the watershed approach, and in a given watershed, we plan activities through which we harvest water, be it digging of farm ponds, be it desilting of the old ponds that exist, construction of structures like the check dams, and some other activities for conservation of the soil. So that's largely what we do. Either by taking the watershed approach or otherwise, right? But the idea is to store as much of rainwater as is possible in the locality, right? Groundwater recharging through bore wells and through natural percolation from the ponds and other structures, check dams and other structures. So the idea is also to not just maintain the water table, but to kind of increase that also in due course of time. And we've actually seen some good results there, with water table rising by about 20-25 feet in some of our program areas because of the intervention. But then, what happens is that once there is more water available, the farmers shift from, their regular crops to cash crops. Vegetable cultivation is easier when there is more water. Then, some of the areas which is rain-fed comes under irrigated area because there is water available. So, there again, the farmers can plan crops which give them
pumping out the groundwater, and they start doing the cash crop there.
So, what we do is while farmers continue to pump out water for irrigation, but we try and maintain the water balance. In fact, that takes me to another project that we have picked up in UP along with Water Resources Group of the World Bank. The idea there exactly is creating the water security and maintaining the water balance. So what we have done is that we've actually mapped the entire block in district Sitapur, looked at the water consumption part of it and the rainfall, and therefore worked out the deficit. And now we have planned activities to fill that gap so that the water balance is maintained. So that's largely what we are doing, using technology as much as we can, identifying the aquifers, finding the right places to construct structures so that the structures give us the maximum benefit. So that's really our approach. From the business perspective, Ranjan, we also have taken up this goal that our cement business should be 20 times water positive by 2030. We are already at about 10 times water positive. So we are actually keeping an eye on that also. So for every liter of water that we take for our business, fresh water that we take for our business, we ensure that we give back 10 times of that.
Interesting. So there are these three outcomes that I'm looking at from this project primarily. First is the water conservation happening, which is like an essential environmental element that we are looking at. Then there is livelihood being generated because the water is being used by the farmers and they are being able to earn more because they can grow cash crop. And we are giving back, or say we are also benefiting from the sustainability perspective of the company. So as much water we are using, we are also rechannelizing or say reharvesting that in the places there. Is this the promising project that you talk about? You say this is one of the closest projects.
So this is, yes. In fact, this is one of our earlier projects that we started. And like I said, we are close to creating a harvesting capacity of about 30 million meter cube now, which I said is about 10 times our own fresh water consumption. And we want to take it to 60 million meter cube in the next 7-8 years. This is very interesting. But of late, Ranjan, one of our other programs which is really expanding is our work with youth to skill them. And this is what we are doing very closely with the Government of India and with various state governments. So what we have done is that, in alignment with Government of India's Government Skill India initiative, we've also started to set up skill training programs wherein we provide short duration skill training to youth in the local areas and then also assist them to get employed. In fact, that's one of our larger focus areas, employment, not just training. So thus far, we have set up about 13 skill training centers already. We have a capacity of about 5,000 youth every year to be trained under these centers. But besides, we also have ITIs for a slightly longer duration program. So we have two private ITIs, one in Odisha and one in Tamil Nadu that we had set up. And I think I must mention that both these ITIs are amongst the 10 best private ITIs in India.
Wonderful.
Other than that, government has also, having looked at our work in the skilling space, chosen us to be a partner in two government ITIs, one in Bihar and the other one in Maharashtra. So we also chair the management committee of these ITIs. So all put together, as of now, we have a capacity to train about 7,000 to 8,000 youth every year.
That's wonderful.
But we are expanding this capacity. So we have a plan to...
The skill centers that you mentioned, they are being owned and operated and run by the foundation itself. So there is no third partner in there.
So there are partners, Ranjan, but these are owned by Dalmia Bharat Foundation and operated by Dalmia Bharat Foundation. But we have other partners also. Good that I'm glad that you asked that. I would have forgotten to mention this. But we have other industry partners also who have come on board and are working very closely with us. Just to take an example, Schneider Electric. So in many of our centers, what they have done is that they've helped us set up lab for training electricians, and they also train our trainers. So that way they are one of our industry partners that we have. Bosch is also our partner. So we work with them. Bosch has chosen to train or build the human capital in healthcare sector. So Bosch works with us on training general duty assistants or home health assistants in the healthcare sector. So they are also our partner.
That's part of their CSR.
That's part of their CSR
along with our foundation.
Yes, that's right. So while these centers are owned by Dalmia Bharat Foundation, operated by Dalmia Bharat Foundation, we have government, other than the private sector companies. We work very closely with government of Odisha, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka. Now we have set up center in Assam. In fact, we work very closely with Uttar Pradesh government and of course NSDC. So we have a collaboration there as well. So that way, there are a very large number of partners come on.
That's how it works. No, it has to be a collaborative approach. All the stakeholders have to come together. Only then the social program or the theory of change actually works at the grassroots.
That's true. So I think you very rightly said that. Because to my mind, there are two direct benefits. One is that these partnerships help us amplify, so we can scale up. The other is that each of the partner brings in a certain amount of expertise and value. we wouldn't have trained the electricians the way Schneider can.
True.
So I think it gives us also an advantage by having them as one of our partners. And in fact, the quality of the training is such, Ranjan, that now these organizations have actually started to hire people who are trained at our center. So as we speak, I think last week a batch of about 15 trainees from our Orissa center, one of our Orissa centers, they've gone to Schneider Bangalore and joined that company.
Great.
So that way, and coming back to the impact part of it, when you speak of impact, like one of the things is to look at the social returns and all of that. But if I look at our skill training program in absolute terms, every trainee who comes to our center and is trained for 3 to 4 months on an average ends up getting a job in the salary range of 10 to 15,000 or 60,000.
Oh, nice.
And these are kind of people who come from very humble backgrounds, right? So they are like real bottom of the pyramid kind of people. And we've seen trainees coming to our center from families wherein the survival or the existence is at stake, and then suddenly these people end up getting 15,000, 14,000 rupees. Most of them, in fact, I don't have the data ready with me now, but my hunch is that about 90% of these trainees come to us from families where the annual family income will not be more than 35,000-40,000 rupees. And imagine in a 3 months training, 4 months training, a girl from the same household earning 1.5 lakh, 1.6 lakh annually, which is like 4 times their,
yes.
4 times. So you can imagine. So we did an interesting study along with EY. So we looked at the quality of life that changes once they have passed out of our center and are into employment. The smartphones, the increase in number of smartphones that they've started to use, the two-wheelers shift from cycles to maybe scooter or a bike, kacha houses to pakka houses. In fact, there's expenditure on food. For example, pre-training, if the average was about 1,500 rupees, it has gone to 2,800 rupees. I think that's an amazing indicator of the
They're eating better and the nourishment is happening.
Exactly. So when you meet these people and when you hear their stories, I think from that point of view, I would say this is one of the more impactful programs that we have, skill training youth. Because as many people you train, you have those many stories.
And that makes you feel lucky. You're sitting in a corporate using somebody else's money, going and spending it on somebody else, and you are getting the satisfaction out of that.
And that also gives us another opportunity, Ranjan, because most of these people come from areas which are closer to our factories. Most of these people and households would have an aspiration to work with us or with other industry in that area, but it's not practically possible to hire everyone, right, in the factories. So it gives us an opportunity to address their aspirations and help them carve out an alternative livelihood. And most of them end up being very happy. Every month we have some or the other batch getting absorbed by an employer and the send off, and we having the government officials also participate in that send off. I think that's something which is really satisfying.
In case government should participate because it's the government job that we are doing.
So government,
but that
way I think I must tell you, Ranjan, our experience with the government has been amazing. Almost all the state governments that we have worked with are very proactive, and I think the public-private partnership has really come a long way.
Great.
From the early days of my career when this concept had started to come in, public-private partnership.
You've seen that side as well, yes.
And now I think there is a huge amount of change and development. Positive change, actually.
Positive change, yes. So talking about this public-private partnership, so it's like I'll just keep picking out questions from our conversation. So that's how that's what the idea of this is. So these stories, because we have been talking to corporates since 2009. The CSR has evolved, the community relationship has evolved, the investment mechanism has evolved, and there is actually a great impact happening at the grassroots. It's just not Dalmia Bharat Foundation. You would be meeting stakeholders from this, or your peers from the other corporates as well. They all have stories in pockets. And these stories have to go out and people have to say, this is the why when we are conversing. So somebody hears this story, somebody gets to know, okay, this program can be done better, the partnership can be held. So now there are a lot of challenges as well in this one. So we have talked about implementing, we talked about the positive change that comes out, but there must be challenges. So I'll just give you an example of one challenge. So there is this tailoring institute that some organization had put up alongside beautician courses. So initial 3 years was really good because in that geography, a lot of women got trained and they started working on their own. Now it has reached a sort of a saturation level. You cannot continue to train women in the area to become tailors, otherwise all of them will become tailors or beauticians or something, and the demand would go down. So they are improvising and strategizing. So coming to the skill institutes, for how long can we keep creating that workforce, and how do we innovate to have different courses or different employment opportunities for people there?
Yeah, so Ranjan, you rightly said, if you were to build that social capital or the human capital, I think one needs to also look at the carrying capacity of that area. Right? And these regular training and beautician courses somehow, I fail to understand the economics of these programs actually. I'll give you an example why I think. Most of the tailors that I have visited all my life have been men, right? And you go to any part of India where there is a tailoring course, you will always find only women being trained.
Yes.
In the centers.
Right.
So I don't know why. I mean, do we look at that as from a very gender lens, or I don't know. But anyways, having said that, Ranjan, what we essentially do is, see, if you look at the Indian, India as a market to absorb skilled workforce, I think there is a huge gap. I won't go into the numbers because I think everyone knows. So, if I just take an example of, let's say, the real estate sector, right, the construction sector. I think about 3-4 years ago, there was a gap of about 1.5 million people, skilled people, which are needed in this sector. So there is a deficit of 1.5 million. You look at any sector, the deficit will be in this range. So there is a huge requirement of skilled. Yes, the challenge comes when you look only at a given smaller job.
Correct.
Right? There will, of course, be a limited requirement or a limited gap. And then when you start training 10 tailors in one village or a set of 10 village, every 3 months you have another set of 10 tailors, being trained, you're going to reach nowhere.
Obviously.
You're not going. So what we have done is, one, we have looked at the macro level, right? So state to state, what is it that the youth can easily be trained on, and what is it, which is in huge demand, where the gap is huge. So we've kind of linked those. And very interestingly, Ranjan, I must tell you that when we started working on this program, when we started to set up our centers, even before the first trainee had come to our center, we had a tie-up with at least 10 different organizations who were the potential employers, right? So we had those tie-ups even before we had started training.
We had the demand already for those people we are going to train.
So we had the demand already. So organizations like Potia in the healthcare sector, or Shahi Exports in the apparel sector. So we had a tie-up with all of them. So because of which, what has happened is that every trainee who come to our center and successfully graduates, we get an offer letter to all those trainees who are interested in Beijing. Of course, there is certain percentage, 15 to 20%, who want to set up their own enterprise, right? So for them, they are not looking out for a job. For the rest, for every trainee thus far, we have been able to get them an offer letter, to all of them. So that record is like 100% for us, and we have been able to maintain that. Of course, there is, after the dropouts and all of that, there are still
It's
about
always like
70.
at all institutes, so it's at
There are
IIM
about,
also, so
yeah,
it's understandable.
there are about 75% of trainees who are continuing in the job. So even that is not that bad a number. So I think that challenge that you mentioned of Ranjan is real. But I think now in this time, one needs to look beyond. Migration could be stressful, but I think if you are skilled and then you migrate, then I think, that really helps. Perhaps you and I would also be migrants. I am for sure. I'm not sure
So am
about
I. So am I. We
Right.
always migrate towards greener pastures, so that's what's
No,
happening
but we migrated with a skill.
with the
right?
skill. Yes.
We migrated with a skill, and therefore we have been able to
Sustain ourselves.
earn our livelihoods and sustain ourselves.
Correct.
And so do our trainees now. So they know what is the kind of skill which is going to be needed in their employment. We train them on that. We try and bring people from these organizations during the course of training also, so that there is some sort of communication. We also seek assistance or guidance from these employers on the things that we need to add to the curriculum, so that we continuously update that. So that way,
beyond technical aspects, there has to be some social skills.
Yes, very right. In fact, beyond technical aspects also, the soft skills which are needed, or the skills which make them more employable. I think those are very essential. And that reminds me, Ranjan, that we have another partner in IBM. And IBM, they have created a platform where our trainees get the soft skill training, or the particular sector related soft skill trainings also, that we help them get. So I think that's important.
We talked about the social initiatives. We talked about primarily the environmental initiative, wherein you focused about only the water part. So apart from that, is there anything else you do in the environment space?
Yes, yes, of course. Like I mentioned already, we are one of the very sustainable cement companies globally, and we, like I said, we have already committed ourselves to our 2040 goal, and we are working on that. So there is a lot that we are doing in that space. Carbon neutrality, using all of our energy through renewable sources, converting all of our vehicles to electrical vehicles by 2030. So I think there are very strong commitments that way that our group has made.
It sounds very interesting, because when we are talking to a company which is into cement manufacturing, which is the primary business, and then they are talking about being sustainable. So it's like when you're looking at, because you are also a sustainability assessor, you would know about Core 1, Core 2, Core 3 emissions and all.
Yes.
So, all of us have been primarily talking about 2030 or 2040 at the most 2050 as a carbon neutrality, or say going carbon neutral, or say going water neutral, at least some larger organizations that I've been looking at. Do you think, as an individual, not from a company's perspective, this sounds practical? Companies into this?
Yes, Ranjan. In fact, I think what I see, all this, the way it is getting converted into action in our organization, I think this is really, really practical. And if you've heard our CEO on some of the forums, in fact, he shared the stage with the UN Secretary General also recently. He's always said that sustainable is profitable, or green is profitable. Right? So with that philosophy, if we are actually able to improve our bottom line, even when we are shifting to these sustainable practices, I think then nothing stops us. Right? So that way, the kind of commitment that we have and the kind of action that I see in the organization, I think that's pretty interesting. And not just our cement business. Of course, cement is kind of usually in the eye because of it having a larger footprint. But even our sugar business, the kind of work that we are doing with farmers for sustainable sugarcane cultivation, and our focus on water there as well. In fact, our focus on maintaining and improving the quality of soil in those areas. I think that's also something very amazing. In fact, our sugar business is the first sugar industry in India to have brought out the sustainability report. So no other sugar company in India has done that so far.
Interesting.
There again, you know,
yes. The
sustainability
reporting, the transparency is becoming clearer. So if
yes.
I used to talk to people in this sustainability space. So I'm talking about like 5-6 years ago when we used to talk about sustainability aspects of the business. So the individuals who were leading those divisions, either the sustainability lead or the ESG lead, also they would talk about there is a little conflict between what their vision and the board vision. But I think sustainability has reached the board level now. Decisions have been made at the board level, so they are understanding now the sense of climate change, what is happening, and they have to do something around the sustainability.
Yeah. So in fact, what we have done in our organization is to, you know, because sustainability, you rightly said, it's not just about environment, or it's just not about CSR, or it's not just about, you know, governance.
They're all small components of sustainability.
Yes, exactly. So you know, keeping that in mind, Ranjan, what we have done is that we have actually created steering groups to drive sustainability and ESG in all our business verticals. You know, so we have a steering group in the sugar business. We have a similar steering group in our cement business, and then we have people, talents from all these relevant functions who are part of it. So HR is on board, finance is on board, commercial is on board, CSR, environment, governance. So and you know, this steering committee meets every week. So we have a set agenda, we have a long-term goal, we meet every week, we discuss various issues, our priorities, our actions, our strategies, and then we work together with this, and we very regularly meet the leadership, the promoters and the CEOs of the businesses. So everyone is involved that way. So that is actually helping us integrate this into the culture of our business, right? So it doesn't look like an independent vertical, right? And I think that's really,
be anyway.
It can't be. So I think that's actually, you know, giving us a lot of advantage, you know, to be focused and to kind of maintain that momentum with which we are going in that direction.
Okay, so very interesting sustainability aspects. Of course, CSR becomes a part of sustainability, and you have been driving that as well. We talked about challenges as well, several challenges on the CSR program. Going forward, let's assume we are sitting in, say, 2030 now. Okay, we are again having this conversation, and I asked Vishal, what is the collective impact that the foundation would have made or has made in the last 10 years? Because it's like a lot of money that is going into CSR as well as sustainability initiatives. Probably in 2 or 3 lines, if you have to describe impact of the foundation in 2030, how would it be, or what it would be?
Right. So, you know, before I actually go to the impact, we have a very clear output goal that way. Yes. So in 2030, you know, if we were doing this conversation, I would have told you that we have actually created about 1 million sustainable jobs in our you know, in our areas of operations. So I think that's one big goal, Ranjan, that we are driving. Also, we would also assess the contribution that we have made to the SDGs per se, right? Be it through our work on livelihoods, or be it through our work on water, or be it through our work on infrastructure. So again, you know, that is pretty important. So in terms of the impacts, I think it will be very important for us to know that what is it that we have contributed, right? Exactly. And then, of course, in 2030, I think by then we would have already achieved our RE goal. We would be completely on renewable energy by then. Our vehicles would be electrical vehicles by then. And I think we would have gone closer to our 2040 goal of being carbon neutral. So that way, I'm sure our carbon footprints would be much lesser than what these are today. We actually have one of the least carbon footprints already, but I think by then we would have progressed a lot on that as well. So that is what we are working on. So very clear 2030 roadmap is what we have laid down already. And
So that's mostly the answer to this, because we have already laid down the map. So this is what we want to achieve, and we would have achieved by then. So that's what the outcome of all our efforts or all our initiatives would be anyway. So how do you communicate about this to a consumer who's a little more aware and say a conscious consumer, and who looks at the brands before buying them or before associating themselves with those brands? For example, I'll just give you our own example. So me and my wife Padma, who is a editor, so we were discussing about moving to another car, and apart from that mileage of the car or say economics of the car or the brand of the car, so we were also looking at the social side of the company, because being in this domain, we have been privileged to talk to those companies, know about their social initiatives, how transparent they are. And despite because we knew that despite there being a major cost difference between the two vehicles, we ended up buying another one, which was quite expensive because social initiatives or say the sustainability initiatives of the company were more, and they were quite transparent in there. So is there any message or anything that you would want to share with those kind of consumers? And otherwise, what is the say, if I want to know about the sustainability initiatives or social side of the company, how do I go and access this information out there?
Right. So Ranjan, all this information, we put that up in the public domain, very transparent. So what I have spoken with you is all of this is available on our websites, right? So you will see our carbon footprints on the website. You will see our water footprints on our website. You will see all the information on our CSR initiatives on our website. In fact, we had migrated to integrated reporting many years ago. So all this information goes into our reports also, our annual report, integrated reports also, and all of that is in the public domain. We also, from time to time, share information on our environmental and social aspects through the social media platforms also. Right. So we are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter and everywhere. So we try and share as much information as we can.
And you participate in these conversations and people.
And these kind of conversations. So people, friends like you also give us an opportunity to talk about our work and then send across this message to everyone on sustainability and CSR work that we're doing in that space. So this is how we kind of share information with everyone. We try to be as much transparent as we can. Dalmia Bharat Foundation, they have their own communication platforms, their reports, and other social media handles. So we use those also for communicating with everyone, with stakeholders.
It sounds really good. So let's conclude it somehow. Probably maybe any message that you would have for the domain stakeholders from your experience, from your learnings, probably the professionals who are your peers, as well as the young professionals who are coming into the CSR space or sustainability space. Something that you would want to share, either an experience or a message that you might have for them. Or anything that you want to share. Yes, I might have missed out on asking you this.
No, I think you have made me say everything. So I've already said that. No, there's no message for the peers. In fact, I have been very fortunate of having some very good friends who have been working in this space, and I think I have learned a lot from every one of them, each one of them. And I think the new generation that's coming is much smarter than us. So I, in fact, end up learning a lot from my younger colleagues in the organization. The ones who just come out of universities and institutions, sometimes they come with amazing ideas that that older people like me never think of. So I think that way they are also somehow kind of end up teaching me something or the other, which is really, really interesting. But I think there are amazing people working in this space. The organizations are very committed, and I'm sure the contribution in nation building through CSR is pretty amazing. And I think we have seen that particularly in the COVID times, when each company has actually gone beyond their capacities and worked along with the governments to address this emergency kind of a situation. So I think the future is bright that way.
Future is bright that way. Yes. Great. Thank you so much, Vishal. We have covered whole lot of subjects, and it was an interesting conversation. A lot of interesting social initiatives that I did not know about the foundation. I had an overview, but I did not know about the depth of those programs, initiatives. They are